Biden administration in full damage control mode today after the leak of those highly classified documents from the Pentagon. Hello, I am John Bachman.
Hi, everybody. I'm Bianca De La Garza. Great to have you with us today. And the Justice Department is also now investigating the size, the scope of the breach, and trying to figure out exactly who is behind it.
Yes, despite all the investigatory power that already exists in our Defense Department, these new documents, no one knows exactly how they were leaked yet out onto social media. But some estimate it could be hundreds of documents. It's not just how many, but what's inside them. Of the dozens of documents reviewed so far by the Associated Press and other news outlets, many were marked top secret and contained information about key U.S. allies like Ukraine, South Korea, and Israel.
And of course, as a result of that, the Pentagon now says senior military leaders have actually been reaching out to contact our allies to address the fallout of these leaks. Batches of documents appeared online in some stages, but some were posted more than a month ago. And at a news conference yesterday, Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin says he personally had not been briefed on the leak until last Thursday. Take a listen.
I will tell you that we take this very seriously, and we will continue to investigate and turn over every rock until we find the source of this and the extent of it.
For the very latest, let's get you out to our chief White House correspondent, James Rosen, who has more on how President Biden and this administration are trying to confront these leaks. James, good afternoon.
Bianca and John, good afternoon to you. President Biden arrived in Dublin, Ireland, a little over 90 minutes ago. That followed a speech at Ulster University in Northern Ireland this morning, in which the president lauded the Good Friday Agreement on its 25th anniversary and promised the citizens of Northern Ireland the U.S. will be with them every step of the way. Earlier, the president met for tea with the British Prime Minister Rishi Sunak. They discussed regional issues, including post-Brexit trade negotiations, but also the continuing fallout from this recent series of leaks of classified Ukraine war documents. Sources tell Newsmax investigators that a half-dozen agencies inside the Defense Department, including the Defense Intelligence Agency, the Air Force's Office of Special Investigations, and the Navy's famous NCIS, were displeased and to some extent demoralized by the defense secretary's decision at the outset to bring the Justice Department into the case. Biden aides have acknowledged this week they do not know who perpetrated the theft and disclosure of these military, diplomatic, and intelligence secrets, nor, John and Bianca, how long it will go on, nor how much damage will be done in the interim. John and Bianca.
Wow.
Well, James, I know you've had a chance to talk with the NSA's cybersecurity chief who was speaking yesterday. Tell us about that conversation. I think you were able to ask him some questions about this. What did he have to say?
Well, John, these comments came from Rob Joyce. He is the director of cybersecurity at the National Security Agency. It's very rare that he speaks on camera or publicly. Yesterday, he addressed a think tank audience at the Center for Strategic and International Studies in Washington. Joyce issued a blunt warning to the major tech firms here in the United States to learn the lessons imposed on them in the first weeks of Russia's invasion of Ukraine some 14 months ago. Joyce urged U.S. executives to, quote, tabletop, which means war game out, those lessons in anticipation of a possible Chinese invasion of Taiwan.
And often they had people in Ukraine that were now going to be in a war zone, and they had to think about getting them out. They had Russian or Ukrainian sysadmins, and they had to think about what privileges they wanted them to have. They had network segments in Russia or Ukraine, and they had to think about whether they severed that or firewalled it. Think about if you scratched out Russia, Ukraine, and wrote China, Taiwan, how that changes and how much more intertwined and difficult that is. Because I think that's a really hard problem, and you don't want to be starting that planning the week before an invasion when you're starting to see the White House saying it's coming.
Retired Rear Admiral John Kirby, spokesman for the National Security Council, said in one of the press briefings here at the White House earlier this week, in response to a question from this reporter, that as of yet, the U.S. sees no signs that a Chinese invasion of Taiwan is, quote, imminent or inevitable. John and Bianca.
James Rosen, thank you.
All right, we're joined now by retired SEAL Team 6 member and best-selling author Robert ONeill. He is the host of the Operator podcast and a guy who knows a thing or two about sensitive intelligence. Rob, great to have you with us.
Thanks for having me, John.
Well, I want to start with Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin and his comments about these leaks. Let's take a listen.
Somewhere in the web, and where exactly and who had access at that point, we don't know. We simply don't know at this point.
Doesn't sound like an acceptable answer. I mean, you got this debacle, you got the fall of Afghanistan, you got Austin's fealty to the vaccine mandate, which has decimated the military. And then you have this iconic picture of Austin, which I think kind of underscores his fealty to the vaccine mandate, where he looked like Darth Vader when he was traveling to the Philippines and still got COVID anyway. How is it that a guy like Secretary Austin is still in his job?
Well, you know, he's appointed by the president, so he can keep it at the pleasure of the presidency. And the only thing I saw positive out of that is at least we know he's telling the truth. We don't know. And this is a problem there's bureaucracy all over the place. And I like redundancy in some things, but there's way too much redundancy, and it's way too easy to get a clearance. There are so many people running around with clearances. They're getting emails they don't need to send. And in the military's defense, like, they're trying to avoid, like, you can't bring in a USB port, you can't plug into a computer, but there's just so many emails flying around with different names on them, top secret, SCI, compartmentalized, all that stuff. Too many people have access, and they got away from the need to know. I'm a big believer that on operations, I want my people to know everything they can so they work more efficiently. But not every civilian contractor needs to have access to top secret information. Something happened here. They're going to have a hard time finding. I mean, it was on Minecraft for a while.
Yeah.
Who has access to this? Too many people.
Right.
Yeah, it's crazy. And do you think that there's too much information that is classified right now? That's another aspect of this conversation.
I think too much is classified, and with so much of it, that huge pile of stuff that's not classified is classified, because somewhere, again, in the bureaucracy, someone needs to seem important enough to label it as, this is secret, this is top secret, look at me. And they have, I mean, it goes as far as you walk into a room and they see someone with just a secret badge and not a top secret badge. They turn on these like flashing lights like on a police car, and they can yell secret only just so they sound important. The stuff that needs to be classified needs to be, not everything needs to be, but I mean, if we're leaking that there's special forces operating in Ukraine and they find out about it, that we're taking pictures of bases of our allies, this is a very, very big issue. It harms It harms our allies, it hurts the alliance, and then it emboldens the enemy.
And if it's like the other leaks, it can get people killed, Americans killed and our allies killed.
And like we heard, they don't know if there's more coming. So again, every day it's like another leak could drop. So we're watching that so closely, Robert. Well said. We want to ask you about this interview that's making a lot of news. It's Jon Stewart sitting down with Deputy Defense Secretary Kathleen Hicks. He didn't hold back on what he thinks of the Defense Department. She really didn't have an answer for some of the issues he raised. Let's take a look here.
We got out of 20 years of war, and the Pentagon got a $50 billion raise. Like, that's shocking to me. Now, I may not understand exactly the ins and outs and the incredible magic of an audit, but I'm a human being who lives on the earth and can't figure out how $850 billion to a department means that the rank and file still have to be on food stamps. Like, to me, that's corruption. I'm sorry. And if, like,
I mean, she really didn't answer, couldn't answer, to a lot of the numbers there, Robert. I mean, but he's saying what a lot of people are thinking here about waste, fraud, and abuse. What are your thoughts there?
Well, Bianca, I just watched the entire interview, and it was apparent that the Deputy Secretary of Defense wasn't exactly sure, just was really good at deflecting questions. And when she didn't have an answer, when Jon Stewart was asking about how you can't even pass an audit with an $850 billion budget, why do you get that money in a $50 billion raise? And her answer was, well, you just don't understand an audit. Well, those are two different things. Well, I don't have that security clearance, which is odd when you're talking about leaked documents, and the Deputy Secretary of Defense she's not at that pay grade. She's in Washington, D.C. He asked her why every single congressman has her own military lobbyist, yet we have military men and women driving Uber so they can afford food and not get on food stamps. And they have no answer for it. And I mean, there's obviously a lot of corruption going on with the whole, everything like an $800 toilet seat. That money's going somewhere. Right. And a lot of people, a lot of good old boy networks, a lot of Washington, D.C. here just throwing money around, and they can't be held accountable because they're the government.
Yeah, it's not going to veteran care. I mean, we still have way too many. One suicide a day is too many, but you still have veterans committing suicide because they can't get the health care they need. You mentioned Army veterans driving Uber to make ends meet. That brings us to the story about Army Sergeant Daniel Perry is still in prison. He was convicted of murder. even though the police in Austin, Texas said this is a clear case of self-defense. I wanted to get your reaction to this. Governor Perry is trying, or sorry, Governor Abbott is doing everything he can to try and expedite this. But we have a veteran here sitting in jail for a murder he did not commit.
Yeah, you know, the thing that broke my heart about this is the guy he killed, Garrett Foster, was also a veteran, an Air Force veteran. And this is a big conversation about Foster was able to carry an AK-47 in downtown Austin legally. That's a question of should you, because now you're in Texas where a lot of people have guns. And they said that Sergeant Perry drove his car into a crowd of BLM protesters. And at that point, he said Foster raised his gun at him. And if you remember back then, there was a lot of violence, even though the media said it was mostly peaceful. There's a lot of violence, a lot of looting, a lot of people getting pulled out of places and beaten. People did get shot and killed. So that's about a sixth of a second when an AK-47 is there. You have a .357 Magnum. It's fight or flight, and he had nowhere to go. He's going to run people over. I personally hope he doesn't spend his life in prison. It's a sad story. The protest didn't need to happen, and it's just I feel bad for both families.
Rob, great to see you. Thank you.
Thank you.